Okay, so welcome to this session on open education resources, the biology edition, which Laura is going to talk to us about. And I'll just let Laura head right into it.
Sure, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here today. Thank you to Isaac for this opportunity to present today. I appreciate every time I get to talk about open educational resources. So my history with open educational resources has had a path that is probably fairly familiar or common. Back in the day when I started teaching, I started with a proprietary textbook that was commonly used for my type of course. It was very familiar to me as a biology student and then an instructor. It had lots of resources with it. It was a long time ago, so those resources included overhead transparencies, also had some PowerPoints, a few online resources, and a test bank that I could use for exams. But over time, that textbook became more expensive for students and actually to the point where students would be unwilling or even unable to buy that textbook, especially for a single semester non-major course. So I made the decision at the time to redesign the way I offered the course, and I went to what then eventually became a zero-cost materials course, where I wrote all of the content myself, including the lab manuals or lab notebooks that we use. I designed the activities and the assessments. And between the lecture and the lab, I gave the students everything they needed to learn. So they didn't have to go off to a textbook and read something and come back to class. So that's just the way that I kind of dealt with this proprietary textbook getting so much more expensive. I also found that the online resources that came with it were a bit of an add-on all the time, a little bit of busy work. At the same time I was writing that content, I was working with some colleagues here to develop a fully online biology class, one that fulfilled the lab science credit. And it was the first one that was developed and offered in the province. And that course is full of open educational resources for the units and the labs. So I was getting a lot of experience with it at the time, even if I maybe didn't really know the name or understand what I was doing completely at the time. And now in my path, I'm at the zero cost materials course. So my textbook comes from OpenStax, which I'm going to talk about. And I'm trying to make the course content and the course materials as accessible to as many students as possible. So that's where I'm at now. I have a few repositories that I use and one that I'm hoping to use in the future. The first one is OpenStax, which lots of people have heard of. It was an early entry into the open educational resource space. And it's much more than a textbook. As an organization, they're very committed to improving learning through universal design and quality materials. So everything is peer reviewed, for example. The textbooks are open source, so they are adaptable. You can make changes to them. They are interactive. They come with activities students can do, things that you can get them to do in class or lab, but also you can flip that a little bit and get them to do some of that work at home. Their textbooks often come, or all do come as PDFs, which, while it has some troubles, can be used for screen reading software, so it's quite accessible. OpenStax has extended the topics that they use or the subjects that they have for textbooks, all the way from AP biology up to quite advanced post-secondary content. And what I really like about OpenStax is they recognize that sometimes we're teaching people that are not majoring in our subject area. So they have actually different versions of the book. And they are beginning to move into translating their textbooks into other languages. BC Open Campus, or BC Campus, sorry, is an open textbook collection, which sort of sounds a little bit like OpenStax, but it's actually, I don't know, I sometimes think of it as an index of open source materials. And They have each page that you look at a resource comes with a lot of information about what the resource is, most often a textbook or some other kind of document, but it sort of a measure of its accessibility, its licensing, and then you can link out to those sources. BC Campus started out of their online education program with the goal of making higher education affordable and accessible. They have resources that they assess for universities, colleges, and applied institutes. So there's a great broad range of resources that are available. You can probably find something for anything you're trying to teach. And then they actively encourage people within BC Campus to develop their own OER resources. So for example, there were people who were using the Concepts of Biology book that I used, but adapted it for a Canadian context, sorry. So it was quite an interesting repository that I found, and I go there often. Now, the last repository I have on here is called PhET, or Physics Education Technology, and these are simulations. So these are like computer simulations for things that you would teach. I looked at these a long time ago, but they were mostly in math, like physics and math, but they have expanded their collection of simulations to include biology. So things that work really well for simulations like natural selection, gene expression, color vision. And the best part about PhET is they're always adding more resources. They're extremely well supported for both the instructor and the student. I mean, as a biology student, I remember getting lost in simulations that we had to do in labs, and you're trying to figure out where to click and what you're supposed to read. And they have made the commitment to being very well documented and supported, so you really don't get lost in those. Some other resources that I've used over the years, and some of them I come back to a lot. And there are three different kinds of sources. The first one I have listed here is the National Center for Case Study Teaching in Science. It used to be its own organization, but is now part of the National Science Teachers Association in the United States. There is a small fee for this one. So that sort of came out of the idea of protecting some of the assessments that people had worked hard to create assessments to go with their case studies, and trying to reduce the sharing of those. But it's free for students to use. They don't have to sign up for anything. You just give them what you want them to use. For my classes, the case studies are one of the ways I extend the foundation knowledge that we're learning into the real world. So how do we use this foundation knowledge to answer questions or solve problems in the real world? The case studies are written, and some of them are being rewritten to follow modern universal design standards. So it improves the student experience. They're all PDFs. They're all adaptable. You can, for example, I use case study on genetics that just goes a little bit too far into the genetics. So I just eliminate that part from the case study, and the assessment questions. If I feel like they're not quite getting at what I want the student to do, I can write my own assessment questions. So they're completely adaptable. One good thing about the Case Study Center is they encourage people to write case studies. So they give you resources on how to write a good case study. And they have a couple of decades of experience. So they give all that information. All the case studies are written by instructors. Generally, I think almost all of them I've seen have been instructors at an institution somewhere, and they're all peer reviewed. So peer review process can be a little slow, so they're backlogged a little bit, but it's worth it to take the science that you know and write it into a case study for students. The second resource that I use that I listed here is the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. So lots of people know about Howard Hughes, eccentric kind of guy with a lot of money. And he established this institute in 1953. The objective of advancing knowledge through research and science education. So in this institute, they always went together with a focus on biomedical science. So they are committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion through both their funding models and through the production of their educational materials. Most of the resources that I have encountered meet accessibility standards. So things like captioning and transcripts, clear fonts, all of that kind of thing. And they're very high quality. So there are 3 resources that I use that I've listed on the slide. The first one is called BioInteractive, and that's kind of where we find all of the things you might use in your classroom. So I use them a lot for things like cells and DNA and genetics. And some of them come as short little snippets of animations or snippets of lectures that they used to produce every year. So they're very targeted to the topic that I'm teaching. And some of them are interactive. They call click and learn. So you click on it, you read something, you watch something, then there are embedded questions and you click again and you go to the next part. So they're very useful and they often have assessments with them. So I don't often use those, I write my own, but they're very useful and again, fully adaptable. I have a really great film production studio called Tangled Bank Studios. And so sometimes I just watch those for my own interest, but they're kind of shorter films about science in the real world, biology out there doing, being done by biologists and things that we've learned. Howard Hughes Medical Institute also offers institution level programming. So they, through their undergraduate and graduate programs, they do a lot of networking programs that bring people together that are talking about science education or science research. Now, the last resource I have on there is kind of my favorite in some ways. While the other ones are good, they have a lot of great resources. This one is a bit different. It was started by one person with a camera and a video camera in 1994, and it's been maintained since. He has a lot of videos and animations and interactive animations. He also has a really good repository of images and videos. So he has those. Sometimes you buy those, sometimes you just use them. But it's really good. It's very different. And it's easy to use them in lectures, to put them online for students who maybe do a little bit of that. We do a little bit of that flipped classroom idea and they do some work at home, or we put them into the labs and they use them to prepare for labs. So they have some visuals to go along with the words. And I use them in my online class all the time. So those are just 3 examples of resources, and there are so many more. So then the question is, how do I actually use these resources? So I've mentioned I show them in my in-person classes. So I'll just put them up on the data projector and just show them. And then sometimes I explain them and go back and show them again, because a lot of them are short, maybe 30 seconds or 1 minute. But then what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create the sense that the students should be interested in going back to these resources outside of classroom time as they're preparing for lab or exams. So what I have on the screen here is just a screenshot from your courses. So when I go to lecture, I write out lecture notes and then I scan those and I post them. And then I post also the links to the resources that we used in class or they will use in lab. So that they get the sense that these are important and they're not just like an add-on thing that I thought of and I just threw up there for them to use. I try to integrate it. I also give them opportunities to extend what we're talking about by giving them resources that are what we call in my class, we call them, these are for interest only, or these are interesting. So that's sort of the cue. And I also remind them, they don't need to learn all new content in these resources, but the resources often bring things together. So for example, the one called double helix actually brings together the previous resources into one sort of summary little video. So that's how I use them in my class. Okay, so this checklist for evaluating open educational resources, it's a source that it comes from a source online. I have the bibliography link at the end of the presentation, and I don't want to go through the whole thing. There are just a few bits of this evaluation tool that have been really helpful to me. And again, thank you, Isaac, for showing me this checklist because it's been really great. The first slide is about relevance and accuracy. So why are we using these resources? What are the goals we're trying to meet? Because we don't want it to be, I mean, it's fun when it's flashy fun, but we don't want it to be only flashy fun. So I tend to think about topics that students have trouble with, or static diagrams that would, be great if they were animations or interactive animations. Adding some online resources for the students to use, like in biology with the labs. Sometimes these resources can be really helpful for lab preparation. But in terms of accuracy, it's really not helpful if you have to stop something and say, okay, what they just said there was actually kind of wrong or old knowledge. So trying to evaluate those resources to make sure you don't have to do that. And then a lot of resources are peer reviewed, which is really helpful. Some resources that I use and that I used to use, but maybe don't use anymore, started out as something like YouTube channels. And they can be useful, but they sometimes have a different focus, like getting traction in their social media space. So you really need to carefully review them. So there are two examples that I use. One is called SciShow, Science Show by Hank Green, and Crash Course by John Green. So those are the Green brothers, if you've heard of them. They have vlogs, and the Vlog Brothers, they're called. So they have a lot of really good information. They started out as education channels, but they were still channels on social media. The next slide is about production quality and accessibility. So I put a little note, could you use this when you test positive and you're like laying in bed sleeping? Could students still get something out of it? So is it easy to use, easy to navigate? I think back to those simulations I did in university labs, and it's like you actually have no idea where to click next to get through this thing. And then is the quality of the audio and video very good? Most of the modern ones are, because our technologies, even on our phones, I mean, it's way better than it used to be. One thing I've learned is that sometimes sources will use contemporary or historical references that not all students will get. So sometimes you have to explain that, or maybe not even use them. Looking for resources that have transcripts or closed captioning, so that, if we think even about students that don't have English as a first language, and some of those English words just go by really fast, this captioning and transcripts can be really helpful. Some resources I really like that didn't have those, I have made my own transcripts. So then the students can use the transcript while we're watching it in class, or go back and read the transcript later. At U of R, I have found some good biology resources in the Films on Demand database. And some of those films, if not all of them, have a live transcript feature. So the words are highlighted as they watch the video. So that can be really helpful too. Okay, so the last slide on the checklist is about interactivity, and then a little note about licensing. So for interactivity, it's the idea that not everything needs to be interactive itself, but how do we keep student learning active while they're using the resource? So does this resource explain a concept? Does it make the student think about how the concept applies in their life? And does it introduce the topic in a way that students think more deeply? So getting the students to employ active learning, not just letting it go by their eyes. And one thing that we shouldn't maybe shy away from is, does it introduce a controversy or a complex or transformational idea to get students thinking about the topic within the context of society? So, or does the resource get students to think about how to solve these complex or transformational problems? So sometimes we shy away from controversy in classroom resources, but sometimes we can embrace it. And then looking at the licensing. So are you allowed to rip this thing apart, or do you need to use it as is? So I'm sure that you've maybe seen or that you know of these licenses, but there's lots of information there. Okay, so just the last slide, and this all these opportunities that I've had to talk about open educational resources have put me in a little bit of a new space. So I think about it like this. I think about how the intersection between our maybe new awareness of our students, the technology that we have, and the opportunities presented to us during the pandemic is in that space is where we can deliver excellent biology content, any content, to enhance the learning of all our students. In my mind, this is a really great time for the creation and implementation of open educational resources. We know more about our students than we did probably in the past. So we understand their situation, and we can bring our teaching to where they are. So the pandemic created obstacles for sure, but it also created opportunities. It gave us opportunities to think about our teaching methods and for making changes. Some of those changes turned out to work very well for students and for instructors. Okay, so just to say that again, where I'm thinking with this is the intersection between our awareness of our students, the technology that we have and can use, and the opportunities presented to us during the pandemic. That intersection is the space in which we can deliver excellent biology content to enhance the learning of all of our students. I love this diagram. I love these thoughts. That's just where I'm at with my thinking so far. All right, so I'm going to stop there. I can answer any questions now, but I also put my email address there, and I will post this PowerPoint presentation. I'm really happy to talk about this by email or now. And that's that. Thank you. And there's the link to the full checklist.
So does anybody have a question for Laura? Oh.
Hey, Barb.
I have one, if you don't mind, Laura.
Yep.
So my question is actually, how detailed are your notes online? Because I always, mine are like pretty detailed, you know me. So the question then is, are they like thinking, why should I attend the class if everything she shows in class is posted online? So does it still feel like it's a real class versus, online? And I know you're doing both. So how do you differentiate? What's your secret? That's what I want to know. What is to getting them to come to class?
Right. I'm just going to show you something. I never quite know what Zoom is sharing. So I have been posting my notes online for almost my entire teaching career, which started in 1999. And part of that came because in my very first semester of teaching, everybody was into PowerPoints at that time. And I learned very quickly in that first semester that teaching biology by PowerPoint is extremely difficult because students, so U of R removed the requirement for high school biology for all their first year courses. So students sometimes had no life science beyond about, whatever they touch on in grade 10 science. So I was finding that I was having to constantly revisit what I had said. So my PowerPoint's on the screen, it's all beautiful and I'm teaching, but because they have no context for what I'm teaching, they were lost all the time. So I started posting notes back then when I actually had to code HTML to get them posted up there. And thank goodness for WebCT back then. So what I do, and I have found there are people who don't come to class and they just get the notes and their mark reflects that. And I tell them very clearly at the beginning of the semester and repeatedly through the semester, relying on just the posted notes will not give you the context for that content. So what I find, for example, we go through a diagram and it looks like a simple diagram, but there are actually 3 layers, 3 diagrams in this one. And so students who only get this, they don't really understand the full context. And so it sometimes for some people takes the first midterm. And then they're like, wow, when she said you should come to class, she meant you should come to class. And one of the other reasons I started doing this a long time ago was it answers the note taker question, because I had semesters where I could not get a volunteer note taker. So most of the students with that accommodation find this works just well for them. So then what I do with my resources is, so at the beginning of the cell cycle, I have a resource that I use. So that doesn't show up in the unit, or sorry, in the lecture notes. But if you're in class, you saw it. So I'll see some students will write cell cycle video. They write that in their notes. And so they know that in class, we watched it there, and then we will watch it again at the end of the diagram. So you're right. Some students will be like, I don't need to come to class, but they were probably not going to come to class anyway. I don't know. I let the natural consequences, I guess, of the mark kind of be the, I don't know, the incentive, I guess.
May I ask a follow-up question? Is that okay? Or is there somebody who's like burning to ask?
I think it's you.
So my question then is, since they've got your notes, are you expecting them to use your words? Because that has actually, some people have said, you know what, why would I, all you want me to do is use your words. That's what you want to read in exams. And if I use other words, for example, things that, were in OpenStax or in any of those other resources, you won't recognize them because they are not your words. And then you won't give me, the 100% that I clearly deserve having never class. I'm sure you've met
yes.
like that. So what do you do with that?
Yeah, so for one thing, when I tell students in the beginning of the semester, and because none of these students come from a biology degree, I found a long time ago, they write those answers in their own words. They don't ever give me what I gave them. So when I create my answer key for my exams, I use the words from class, and I give them a lot of resources, and most of them don't go anywhere else. And I know the words used in those resources as well. But also I've decided it just takes a really long time to mark biology 140 exams, because I have to read everything that they write and determine, do you know what you're talking about? Because this is the answer, but did you just memorize that from somewhere and you're just writing those words down, or do you really understand it? So yeah, when I used to do majors courses and non-majors courses in the same semester, non-majors are almost always answering in their own words. So I have to really figure out what are they saying, and is it demonstrating the answer that I'm looking for? Yeah, those are really good questions. But you get the same way, right? People come to your class, they don't have a background in, say, music history.
Yeah, zero. They think it was a dog because they saw the movie on Netflix. something like that. So, and then
Yeah.
I've got people who are like, I don't want to really know about this, but I've heard it's a really easy class because, and then I'm like thinking, no, when I tell you that you're gonna die first, because you listen to none of the musical examples I asked you for,
Yeah.
then, you know, it is what it is. I find that providing the students with really detailed notes is helpful for international students who are like,
Yes.
you know what, I could do this in fact, I can do this in my language. But, you know, thank you for giving me the words that I need. And even if it does sound memorized, I have actually understood what you've been talking about. That's what I tell myself. Maybe I'm just, you know, delusional or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I have a lot of the international students who appreciate writing the words down. And then a lot of students have said the notes, when I'm writing the notes, they're writing the notes, it keeps us all on track. I'm not going too fast. They're not getting distracted and, you know, paying attention to the Canada Goose out the window. They're able to focus because I'm keeping their focus because I use, well, you know, in the auditorium with the smart podium. But when I teach at First Nations University, I have a document camera and I just write it on paper. And so it's like their focus is right there. And then interspersing with the resources has been sort of helpful at keeping everyone together and going forward.
Anyone else have a question or comment for Laura?
Is that a cat? Joyce has a cat. Look. Nobody brings their cat to class. You can only see them on Zoom.
Yeah.
Where's Morris? Scott? Is Morris anywhere close by?
I
Probably.
love cats in the AC.
Yeah.
Behaving for once.
Or misbehaving if we want to see him.
That's right.
Okay, so I'll just stop the recording and then we can keep chatting if you feel like it.